The Sunset Strip on a Thursday night in 1964 had a particular quality to it. The streetlights cast everything in amber, making the chrome on parked cars look like liquid gold. The air smelled of cigarette smoke, expensive perfume, and possibility. This was Hollywood at its peak, when stars were gods and everyone else was trying to catch their light. Dean Martin and his wife Jeanne were leaving Dino's Lodge, Dean's own nightclub on the Strip. They'd stayed late after the last show, having drinks with friends, laughing at stories that would never make it into the gossip columns. Dean was in his element, relaxed in a perfectly tailored suit, his tie loosened just enough to show he was off duty, but still Dean Martin. Jeanne was radiant beside him, a former Orange Bowl queen from Florida. She had the kind of beauty that didn't need announcing. She was elegant, warm, and importantly, she understood the world Dean moved in. She knew when to laugh at the table and when to be silent. She knew which friends were really friends and which ones were just orbiting Dean's star, hoping some of the light would land on them. They weren't trying to make an entrance or an exit. They were just a married couple heading home after a good evening. Dean had his hand on the small of Jeanne's back, guiding her toward their car. The valet was bringing it around. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Then the rumble started. 6 motorcycles turned onto the Strip, their engines growling like cage animals. They weren't the casual weekend riders you'd see cruising Pacific Coast Highway. These were real bikers, the kind with colors on their backs, dirt under their fingernails, and a particular way of moving to the world that said they answered to nobody. They pulled up outside Dino's Lodge, parking their bikes in a rough semicircle that blocked part of the sidewalk. The lead rider was a big man, 6'3" at least, with a thick beard and arms covered in faded tattoos. He had the weathered face of someone who'd been in more fights than conversations. His name was Hank, though nobody called him that. They called him Hammer, and there was a reason for it. Hammer swung off his bike with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. His crew followed, 5 more riders who looked like variations on the same theme: leather, denim boots, and a collective attitude that the world owed them space. They were loud, deliberately loud, laughing, shoving each other, making sure everyone on the street knew they'd arrived. A couple walking past gave them a wide berth. A man getting out of his car nearby decided to wait inside a bit longer. That's what men like Hammer counted on. Intimidation without effort. Dean noticed them. Of course he noticed them. Dean noticed everything, but he didn't react. He just kept walking with Jeanne, patient while the valet finished bringing their car around. Dean had seen men like this his entire life. In Steubenville, Ohio, where he grew up, there were men who thought muscle and volume made them powerful. In Vegas, in Hollywood, everywhere he'd been, there were men who confused being loud with being respected. Dean understood something they didn't. Real power doesn't announce itself. Real power doesn't need to. Hammer saw Dean and Jeanne. Everyone saw Dean Martin. Even if you didn't know movies or music, you knew that face, that easy smile, that voice that made everything sound like velvet. And beside him, Jeanne, graceful in a simple dress that probably cost more than Hammer's motorcycle. Hammer looked at his crew. One of them grinned. Another nudged him. This was an opportunity, a chance to prove something to themselves, to each other, to everyone watching. Hammer raised his voice, making sure it carried. The insult was crude, vulgar, designed to demean Jeanne, to reduce her to something less than human, to treat her like property for Hammer's amusement. The exact words don't matter. What matters is the intention behind them. Humiliation, dominance, the idea that he could say anything to anyone and there would be no consequences. The street went quiet, not completely quiet. The cars were still passing. The music from inside the club was still playing, but there was a different kind of quiet underneath it all. The quiet of people holding their breath. The quiet of witnesses. A couple nearby froze mid-step. The valet bringing Dean's car around looked stricken, uncertain whether to keep coming or stay back. The doorman at Dino's Lodge, a former boxer named Eddie who'd seen his share of trouble, tensed up, ready to move but waiting to see what Dean would do. Jeanne's grip tightened on Dean's arm, not because she was afraid of the biker. Jeanne Martin wasn't afraid of much, but because she knew her husband, and she knew what he was capable of when somebody he loved was disrespected. Dean stopped walking. He didn't react immediately. There was no flash of anger, no sudden movement, no visible change in his expression. To anyone watching who didn't know him, it might have looked like he hadn't even heard the insult. But Jeanne felt it. The slight change in his posture, the way his jaw tightened just barely, the way his breathing slowed and deepened. Dean Martin was calculating. He was thinking about options, consequences, angles. This wasn't his first time dealing with men who mistook his smoothness for softness. In Steubenville, he'd boxed. He'd run with guys who'd become made men. He'd learned early that the world was divided between people who thought respect was taken and people who knew it was earned. He turned slowly. Everything about the movement was controlled, deliberate. He turned his body first, then his head, until he was looking directly at Hammer. The biker was smirking, playing to his audience, enjoying the moment. Dean didn't smile. He didn't scowl. His face was neutral, almost pleasant, but his eyes were different. His eyes were doing the real work. They were measuring Hammer, assessing him, seeing right to the leather and the beard and the bravado to the insecure man underneath. What did you say? Dean's voice was quiet, conversational, the kind of tone you'd use to ask someone to pass the salt at dinner. But it carried. Everyone on that street heard it. Hammer's smirk widened. He thought Dean was giving him an opening to repeat himself, to double down. You heard me, pretty boy. I was just admiring your lady, wondering if she's as sweet as she looks. His crew laughed, forced laughter, but laughter. They were backing their guy, playing their roles. Dean took one step forward. Just one. His hands stayed at his sides. His voice stayed calm. But that single step changed everything. You should apologize, Dean said. Right now. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples spread outward. Someone in the small crowd that had gathered whispered something to their companion. Another person backed up slightly, creating more space. Hammer laughed, but something was off about it. The confidence was still there, but underneath it was something else. Uncertainty. Because Dean Martin wasn't reacting the way people were supposed to react when Hammer insulted them. Most people either cowered or came out swinging. Dean was doing neither. Or what? Hammer said, taking his own step forward, trying to reclaim the moment. You gonna sing me to death, Dino? His crew laughed again, but it sounded thinner now, weaker. Someone in the crowd said it first. Just 3 words, but they changed the entire dynamic. That's Dean Martin. Another voice, quieter, more urgent. He's connected. The word hung in the air. Connected. In 1964 Hollywood, on the Sunset Strip, in Dean Martin's club, that word meant something specific. It meant that Dean wasn't just a singer and actor. It meant he had friends. Real friends. The kind of friends who didn't need to be at the scene to make their presence felt. Dean caught the shift. He always did. He took another small step forward, close enough now that he could speak even more quietly, so only Hammer and maybe 1 or 2 others could hear clearly. You know what I'm going to do? Dean said, his voice still that same conversational tone. I'm going to give you a choice. You can apologize to my wife right now, in front of everyone here, and then you and your friends can get on your bikes and ride away. Or, he paused. Not for drama, though the pause had that effect. He paused because he wanted Hammer to really hear what came next. Or I could make a phone call. 1 call, and I could mention that a guy named Hammer and his crew were outside my club tonight, disrespecting my wife, causing a scene. And then, Dean shrugged slightly, then it's not my problem anymore. It's yours. He didn't say a name. He didn't need to. The implication was clear. In Dean's world, in the world he moved through with Sinatra and the others, there were people who handled problems. Serious people. People who didn't appreciate outsiders coming into their territory and causing trouble. Hammer's face changed. The smirk was gone. His eyes, which had been locked on Dean's face, now darted to his crew, looking for support, for confirmation that he wasn't imagining the shift in power. But his crew was backing up, literally. One of them had his hand on his bike, ready to leave. Another was staring at the ground. They'd all heard the stories. Everyone in California had heard the stories about Vegas, about the real owners of the casinos, about what happened to people who stepped out of line, about bodies found in the desert, in car trunks, in places where bodies were meant to be found as messages. And here was Dean Martin, calm as Sunday morning, offering Hammer a way out. "I didn't mean nothing by it," Hammer said, and his voice had changed completely. The swagger was gone. He sounded like what he was, a man who'd made a terrible miscalculation and was desperately trying to undo it, then apologize. Dean said simply. Hammer looked at Jeanne. She was standing exactly where she'd been, composed, waiting. Her face showed nothing. Not fear, not satisfaction, just patience. "I apologize, ma'am," Hammer said. The words came out rough, forced through pride that didn't want to bend. That was disrespectful. I was out of line. Dean didn't respond immediately. He let the apology sit there. Let everyone hear it. Let it be real. Then he nodded once. "Louder," he said, "so everyone who heard the insult can hear the apology." This was the real humiliation, not the apology itself, but having to repeat it, having to own it publicly. Hammer's jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists. For a second, it looked like he might refuse, might decide that fighting was better than this shame. But then he thought about that phone call Dean had mentioned. He thought about stories he'd heard from other bikers, from guys who'd tangled with the wrong people in Vegas or LA and disappeared. He thought about how Dean Martin was standing there, completely unafraid, completely in control, because Dean Martin didn't need to be afraid of him. "I apologize to Mrs. Martin," Hammer said, loud enough now that everyone on the street could hear clearly. "What I said was disrespectful and wrong. It won't happen again." Dean turned to Jeanne. "You accept his apology?" Jeanne looked at Hammer for a long moment. Then she nodded once, elegantly. "I accept." Dean turned back to Hammer. "Good. Now here's what happens next. You and your crew are going to get on your bikes and leave. You're not coming back to this club. You're not coming back to this block. And if I hear that you've disrespected any woman on this street, any night, I'll remember your face and your name. Are we clear?" Hammer nodded. "We're clear." "Then go." Hammer and his crew moved quickly. They mounted their bikes with none of the theatrical swagger they'd arrived with. Engines started, rumbling to life, and within 30 seconds they were gone, disappearing down the strip into the night. The crowd that had gathered stood still for a moment, processing what they'd witnessed. This wasn't a fight. There had been no punches thrown, no violence at all. But everyone understood they'd seen something significant. They'd seen power. Real power. The kind that doesn't need to raise its voice or its fists. Dean took Jeanne's hand and walked to their car, which the valet had pulled up during the confrontation. Eddie the doorman held the door open for Jeanne, nodding respectfully to Dean. Dean slipped him a folded bill and got in the driver's side. They drove in silence for the first few minutes. Jeanne looked at her husband, studying his profile in the passing streetlights. His face was calm again, relaxed, like nothing had happened, like he'd just had a pleasant conversation about the weather. "You would have made that call," Jeanne said finally. It wasn't a question. Dean glanced at her, then back at the road. "Didn't have to, but you would have..." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Yes. For me. For you," Dean confirmed. "For us. For the principle that a man doesn't let someone disrespect his wife and walk away like it's nothing." Jeanne reached over and took his hand. "You scared him more than any fight would have." "That was the point," Dean said. "Violence is easy. Violence is what guys like him understand because it's their language. But fear, real fear, that comes from understanding consequences." He realized that insulting you wasn't just insulting a woman on the street. It was insulting Dean Martin's wife. It was stepping into a world he didn't belong in and challenging people he couldn't challenge. "You never said a name," Jeanne pointed out. Dean smiled slightly. "Didn't need to." He filled in the blanks himself. "That's how reputation works." I didn't threaten him with anything specific. I just reminded him that actions have consequences, and some consequences come from people you never see coming. The story spread through Hollywood faster than wildfire. By the next morning, Everyone knew about the biker who'd insulted Dean Martin's wife and been humiliated without a single punch being thrown. The details varied depending on who was telling it. Some versions had Dean making an actual phone call. Others had him name-dropping specific mob figures. A few claimed the biker had pulled a knife and Dean had disarmed him with his bare hands. But the people who'd been there, the actual witnesses, told the true story. They told about Dean's calmness, his control, his quiet authority. They told about how he'd given the biker a choice and made him take the harder road. They told about power that doesn't need to announce itself. The incident reinforced something people in Hollywood already knew, but sometimes forgot. Dean Martin wasn't just a charming singer and actor. He was someone with genuine connections. Genuine weight in a world where weight meant everything. He'd grown up in Steubenville with guys who became made men. He'd partnered with mob-backed casinos in Vegas. He moved through circles where powerful people trusted him, protected him, because he was one of them. But more than that, the incident showed Dean's character. He could have ignored the insult. He could have let a security handle it. He could have called those connections right away and made the problem disappear violently. Instead, he'd given the biker a chance. He'd offered dignity in exchange for an apology. He'd shown mercy even while demonstrating power. That balance, that ability to be both dangerous and decent, was what made Dean Martin legendary. Not his voice, though that was remarkable. Not his acting, though he was talented. But his ability to navigate between worlds, to command respect without demanding it, to protect what mattered without destroying what didn't. As for Hammer, the story followed him. In the biker community, word spread fast about what had happened outside Dino's lodge. Some guys laughed at him for backing down. Others were relieved he'd backed down, because everyone knew what could have happened if he hadn't. His reputation took a hit, not because he'd apologized, but because he'd caused the situation in the first place. Because he'd targeted someone without understanding who they were targeting. He never returned to the Sunset Strip, never went near any establishment where Dean Martin's name carried weight. Years later, an interviewer from a motorcycle magazine asked him about the incident. Hammer, older now, grayer, tried to play it off as nothing. Dean Martin, he said. Yeah, I met him once. Outside his club. Seemed like a nice enough guy. But the interviewer pressed. Is it true you insulted his wife and he made you apologize? Hammer was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, that happened. And you know what? He did me a favor. Because I was young and stupid and thought being tough meant being loud. But Dean Martin taught me something that night. He taught me that the toughest guys in the room are usually the quietest ones. The ones who don't need to prove anything. Because everyone already knows. I'm lucky I learned that lesson from Dean Martin, and not from someone less forgiving. Dean and Jeanne never talked about the incident publicly. In private. It became part of their story, part of the shared history that made their marriage strong. Years later, when their kids were old enough to understand, Dean told them about it. Not to brag, not to seem tough, but to teach them about respect, about protecting the people you love, about the difference between power and violence. Violence is what you do when you run out of options, Dean told his children. Power is having options and choosing the right one. That night, I had options. I could have ignored it. I could have fought him. I could have made a call that would have ended very badly for him. But I chose to give him a chance to make it right. And he took it. That's the best outcome anyone could have hoped for. The street where it happened, that stretch of Sunset Strip outside Dino's lodge, remained a landmark for years. The club eventually closed, as all clubs do, but people who'd been there that night would point out the spot to friends. Right there, they'd say. That's where Dean Martin shut down a biker gang without throwing a punch. That's where I learned what real power looks like. And that's the legacy. Not the insult, which was forgotten. Not the biker, whose name most people never knew. But Dean Martin, standing on a Hollywood street in 1964, protecting his wife with nothing but his presence, his connections, and his understanding that the most dangerous men don't shout. They don't rush. They don't need to prove anything. And when they speak, everything changes. Because that's how it works when you're Dean Martin. When you've earned your reputation through decades of navigating dangerous waters, of befriending dangerous men, of proving over and over that you can be trusted and shouldn't be tested. The violence is always there, lurking in the background, implied but never delivered. And that possibility, that potential, is more powerful than any actual fight could ever be. Hammer learned it. The crowd learned it. Anyone who heard the story learned it. Some men command respect by demanding it. Some men command respect by deserving it. Dean Martin never had to demand anything. He just had to stand there, calm and certain, and remind people who he was. And once they remembered, everything changed. The night ended the way it should have. Dean and Jeanne drove home, had a nightcap, talked about lighter things, and went to bed. The sun came up the next morning on Hollywood, indifferent to the drama of the night before. But for everyone who'd been there, for everyone who'd witnessed it, something had shifted. They understood something new about power, about dignity, about the kind of man who protects what matters without becoming what threatens it. That's what people remembered. Not the insult, not the fear, but the way Dean Martin stood between his wife and a threat and made the threat disappear with nothing but words and reputation. That's a performance worth remembering. That's the night a biker learned that some men don't need to be loud to be heard. And that's why, decades later, people still tell the story of Dean Martin and the biker who made one crucial mistake. He forgot that the most dangerous men in the world are the ones who never need to prove it.